Buenos días, bienvenidos y muchas gracias por acompañarnos en este webinar sobre ciberseguridad en
Good
agua.
morning, welcome, and thank you for being with us on this webinar on security and cybersecurity and water and sanitation. We have interpretation. You can choose the language you prefer in the globe, the bottom of your screen.
Before starting, we remind you that we have simultaneous interpretation in Spanish and English. Please make your language selection in the word icon at the bottom of your screen. Thank you.
Bienvenidos todos a este webinar del día de
Welcome
hoy.
you all to this webinar today. We're going to talk about the challenges of cybersecurity in the water and sanitation sector or industry. Thank you, panelists, for being with us today and participants who are connected from different places in the world, particularly Latin America and the Caribbean. The topic today is very relevant for the water and sanitation industry and the work that the IDB does in the region, the innovation agenda we are developing. Taking different digital solutions also implies challenges, and that's what's gathering us today to reflect and to be ready and serve you appropriately. Innovation allows us to take better services, secure and quality services to different points in the region. However, that digitization and push towards innovation also implies challenges and the potential for different cybersecurity threats. A source of innovation is through the alliance of different actors in the region and outside, gathered to take innovation to different places in the region. We are sponsored by FEMSA, SECO, the Swiss Cooperation, the Korean government, the Israeli government, and we also use bank resources. The publication we will be talking about today was done through this agenda. Thank you very much for being with us. As my colleague said, we have simultaneous interpreting, and you can have access to that through the globe at the right bottom of your screen. Roberto De Michele, who is in charge of services to citizens, and he will make the welcoming remarks. Good morning to you all. Thank you, Natalia. Welcome to this webinar on cybersecurity in water and sanitation. I join Natalia's thanks to Source of Innovation and their donors who have made it possible to have this conversation and initiative that, as we will see along the webinar, is really fundamental. I'd also like to greet the panelists. Know all of them have very demanding agendas, and they have made place for this event. Along today's workshop, we have people who very well know about this matter. And as Natalia said, we'll talk about the last progress made in this issue. Cybersecurity is key and a challenge for the governance of institutions in 2021. As more organizations automate their processes, they collect more data, their capacity to manage this data is higher, and this increases the exposure of entities vis-a-vis the behavior and actions of people who want to put their hands on those sensitive data and create all kinds of inconveniences and problems. So as digitization of infrastructure and human services progresses, we also have the potential increase of risks. This is why vulnerabilities in the cyberspace is something we have to attend to. It is no surprise that a consulting firm predicted that 30% of infrastructure organizations can experience some issue with their security that can't even take them to completely stop. So if we want to work with the volume of data, we need to manage in real time. We not only have to collect that information and manage those processes, we have to be attentive, prepared. We think it's essential to have answers in cyber security matters, which will allow us to navigate in this context vis-a-vis this challenge. This is key to assign security resources and know what infrastructure is essential so that processes do not suffer any alterations or stoppage in their services. Cyber security requires not only technical measure and follow certain methodologies, it's also based on prioritizing and integrating cyber security in our corporate culture. It's important to establish work groups that examine threats from an internal perspective to recommend regulations and standards. Following this approach, as a 2020 cybersecurity report of the bank published together with the OAS, the countries in Latin America and the Caribbean are maturing concerning their cybersecurity public policies. At that time, when we published that report, most countries had already approved at least some national cybersecurity policy or strategy. 20 out of them had established response teams. Only 7 countries, though, had structural plans to protect their critical infrastructure. This means that despite improvements in Latin America, our region is not sufficiently ready to manage cybernetic incidents today and tomorrow, particularly taking into account constant evolution, not only of technological systems, but also of those who try to attack these systems through cyber attacks. Try to change this outlook. The IDP has been supporting cybersecurity in many ways. It produces and disseminates knowledge, and we provide member countries guidance on developing policies. We have helped public agencies in diagnosing their infrastructure, and we offer technical aid to teams in case of attacks. We have approved more than $150 million in programs put at the region's disposal and broadening the scope and support of the bank. The challenge of protecting the digital space will continue growing with the need of the expertise to accompany that. We are proud of supporting these initiatives together with advanced partners such as Innovation Source. I'd like to repeat our thanks to authorities, panelists, and the audience, assuring that today's work will be a very good investment of your time to achieve a better capacity of having appropriate cybersecurity policies in Latin America and the Caribbean. Thank you very much. You have the floor, Natalia. Thank you very much, Roberto. I'd like to pass the floor to Maria Julia Bocco from the Water and Sanitation Division on this issue. Thank you very much, Natalia. Good morning to you all. Thank you again for being with us this morning to discuss such a critical matter for this region, such as cybersecurity in the water and sanitation industry. As you know, water is essential for life sustainment and therefore has been acknowledged by the WHO and most countries as a critical infrastructure. Due to its importance, it's natural that most Governments and organizations point at their digitization as a means to improve the quality of services offered to the population, trying to reduce waiting times or and trying to better treat water and residual waters. As Roberto mentioned, the increasing trend to automation and digitization in the water and sanitation sector improves efficiency and helps reduce operational costs. It also exposes the facilities and operations in the sector to cybernetic risks that are ever greater. The water and sanitation sector is transforming towards a 4.0 industry, including IoT devices that can mean losing dates, issues with privacy and data loss. As more devices connect to operation grids or networks, utilities face a bigger vulnerability, and hackers have a better possibility to access these networks. As a result of these threats, if we are not cyber resilient in the sector, consequences can be catastrophic for the region. Production, transmission, and distribution of water interruptions can produce disease, morbidity, damage industry, agriculture, and trust of citizens in water. Therefore, establishing cybersecurity control that are appropriate is imperative to improve our resilience vis-a-vis cyber attacks, and thus back up the reliability, quality, and of these services. A success story comes from the Israeli government. Their model to protect infrastructure against cyber threats is centralized. They have created a water security unit that deals with cybersecurity and manages operations management and control of physical and digital damage of water, as well as water crises at national, regional, and local level. The unit is also responsible for improving the capacities of governmental ministries, national agencies, and water suppliers, and it participates in the preparation of incidents in the water and sanitation industry by organization, equipment supply, and practice of the required standards. Similarly to Israel, the UK government is also investing considerably in the water resilience. They have published a cybersecurity strategy for water from 2017 to 2022. They established guidelines to interrupt hostile actions, analyze their effects to solve future challenges. Since these infrastructures are critical, the IDB, the IDB Lab, and IDB Invest have promoted technological change, technological resilience, and innovation of suppliers in the region within the Alliance Source for Innovation. Thanks to this alliance, we have developed an online tool aimed at governments and water utilities to measure their cybersecurity status and identify gaps towards an action plan to improve the maturity level of organizations. Last but not least, today we are launching our study, Protecting Water and Sanitation Infrastructure from Cyber Threats. This document is a first of its kind published by the IDB that examines cyber threats in Latin America and the Caribbean, evaluating the cybersecurity status in the water industry in the region and recommending actions for the public and private sectors. We have lots of work ahead to guarantee a digital industry that is secure in the region. We hope that through efforts and events like this one, we will be starting the right path towards secure innovation of our water infrastructure. Please continue with us in this effort. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Maria Julia, for your words. I loved the word cyber resilience, advancing in this cyber resilience agenda to be prepared through different approaches. We have Maria Donoso from UNESCO now, so she can give us some food for thought before Yanir presents the study we're launching today. Thank you very much. Good morning. Allow me, first of all, to thank the Inter-American Development Bank for inviting me to participate in this initiative that we are going to talk in this event concerning cybersecurity in water and sanitation. Today, I will refer to the importance of cybersecurity for water security. In this context, I'll first refer to the UN Conference on Water that took place a couple of months ago. There, water was reiterated as a decisive factor for reaching the SDGs. At the same time, the results of this conference had this role of doing progress and creating more awareness towards SDG 6 that has to do with clean water and sanitation. However, according to several people there, in what refers water security, this was tackled with traditionally, particularly referring quantity and quality of water. However, in this conference, we still saw some lack of security perspective, including water security aspects, the importance of the security of water itself, and the importance for having the water industry count on cybersecurity so it can provide the required service from the point of view of potable water or treatment in sanitation systems. Therefore, based upon the fact that cybersecurity is important for water security, we need to analyze the elements that can be objectives or targets. You had a presentation, but we aren't seeing it. Sorry, you didn't share the screen with us. I'll do it again and see if we can see it now. Can you put it in presentation mode, please? Okay, I'm going to put it in presentation mode and start where I was. I thought you were seeing it, sorry. In any case, let's analyze the elements that can be targets at danger in case of cyber attacks. First of all, databases. Databases on water flows, quality, geographic location of rivers, lakes, and lagoons, but also databases of users of different services of water potabilization or water distribution services. But most of all, products that are online, particularly those that have to do with early alert systems that are online and that users can have access to. They can also be disabled by hacking or by such an event. At the same time, operational processes, no matter if it's purification, distribution, chemical distribution, water disinfection for distributing potable water, they are all framed into computing systems. And finally, infrastructure itself. Here we're talking about dams, about irrigation canals that are managed by computers today, and even large canals like the Panama Canal that depends on cybernetics. So what's happening globally at this in this context from the point of view of cybersecurity aspects? If we open any news app in our mobile or tablet, we will see news such as this one that have to do with cyber attacks, not only in the field of water, but also in some aspects that impact the water industry, such as aspects related to the distribution of inputs or machinery used by potabilizing companies or anywhere in the industry, or also the issues of legislation concerning cyber politics and cyber attacks that impact systems of hydro energy production. So we must remark that there is no surprise in finding that one of the reports in the International World Forum identifies cyber crime as the biggest kind of crime in the world and the most critical today. Therefore, what are the biggest challenges in Latin America in the water and sanitation industries? To tackle with this problem, we have to identify. From this point of view, the most important is that there's a lack of understanding of the importance of this problem at all levels, at national government, local government, private company levels. There are obviously big differences between countries and companies, but if we talk generally, we still do not understand and assess how important the cybernetic problem is in the water and sanitation industry. Secondly, our systems are not updated. I refer to computation systems from the hardware and software perspectives. This creates an impressive vulnerability because hackers or cyber criminals usually have cutting-edge tools concerning computing systems. Therefore, countries and companies, as well as users, are at a disadvantage vis-a-vis these criminals. Also, there's a lack of capacities at managerial and technical level. Because in many companies or in many government agencies, there is one person, usually a computing professional, that just started working in charge of all the computing system. The same thing happens with local government agencies. So there is a true lack of capacity, and we need a quick intervention to respond to cyber attacks. And all of this means there is a need for financial resources, of course. If we don't understand the importance, or if we do not evaluate what a cyber attack can cause as a consequence, it is obviously more difficult to find in government or corporate budgets enough resources to tackle with this problem. Besides, when you go and make an application to go ahead in buying new hardware or updating 0.3 or whatever version concerning acquiring new software, or simply updating the existing software, what happened today to my colleague, for example, Brian. He needed the last available software. So professionals or managers in cyber issues in governments or corporations are seen as, well, he wants the last toy. But it's not that. You need to tackle with the cyber attack problems in companies and government agencies. Why is this so? Because they are increasing very fast, and the threat is very diverse. When a company believes it has the software and sufficient capacity to tackle with ransomware or other kinds of threat, a new threat comes up. So this is a game in which those who cause cyber attacks, in most cases, are 1 or 2 steps ahead as compared to those trying to prevent them in our region. Therefore, considering threat aspects, threats that will occur and are occurring. We have seen what's happened in Mexico, Brazil, and other countries in the region concerning direct threats to the water industry. Taking into account the vulnerability of our region expressed in many aspects, as from the technical aspect to the managerial and legislative and regulatory aspects, as well as concerning the mechanisms and instruments we have to counteract this threat, it's then important
fortalecer la ciberseguridad.
to make an effort to strengthen cybersecurity. In this context, the initiative presented by the ITP today for the water and sanitation industry to counteract cyber attacks will be a very important instrument for the region. And there's still, although there's still much to do ahead, this is progress very useful for Latin America and the Caribbean, because it provides tools that allows for an evaluation of the current situation, what's happening, how attacks are occurring, but it also provides concepts that will allow for understanding how important these aspects are for the general public, from decision makers to users. In this regard, its importance is transcendent because we need to join efforts of intergovernmental agencies, national and local governments, private companies, and particularly the public, generally speaking, because the first barrier against cyber attacks is us. We have mobiles, tablets, computers, and we all have to contribute to improve cybersecurity, generally speaking, or in the industry, will help us to involve other people and increase cybersecurity in the region. Because cybersecurity is fundamental to reach sustainable water, sustainable water security. I hope this introduction helps to what you will do. Very interesting material, and I'll see you again in the Q&A section. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Maria, for this introduction. You have highlighted the critical elements and challenges we have as a region to deal with this issue. I will now pass the floor to Yanir. Yanir Lobstein, who's going to present the study we would like to know about. You have the floor, Yanir. Good morning.
With your permission, I will move to English because my Spanish is not that good. So pleasure to be here. I see that we have a lot of participants, which means the subject is important, as you all understand. But I want to add to that, we invite you to ask questions through the chat box that we have in order for us to answer your questions and to provide you with the needed tools and answers to protect your infrastructure. Few words about the study that this webinar is all about. The primary objective of the study was to conduct a comprehensive assessment of the existing cybersecurity posture within the Latin region when it comes to the water sector. In order to do that, we have interviewed several countries within the region, coming from the federal organization, but also private organization, for us to get a better understanding on the current and realistic posture of the region. The main goal of this study, however, was to provide you with tools and recommendations what to do in order to enhance your cybersecurity resilience. It's not just to provide you with statistical data, but also to provide you with the basic tools in order to help you increase your cyber resilience. I must say that during the study, we realized that most of the facilities within the region are about to do some technological improvement. I heard that we heard and learned that some of the facilities intend to improve their technological environment within the water sector, and it's good. But from the other end, it jeopardizes the environment, because once you are becoming more and more technological and digital, your environments are more and more exposed to cyber attacks. In order to mitigate those vulnerabilities and those risks, you must act. You must recognize the risk, and you must take actions in order to mitigate the risks that were raised due to this technological advancement. I heard that many of the region are not fully aware of the consequences of cyber attacks. I provide you here with some basic examples of what can happen in case of a cyber attack, but it's not the full list. I can provide you and say that some cases of cyber attacks might end with exposing your customers' information, and that's related to data breach. But the most serious cyber attack might jeopardize and might influence your daily operation, starting with the quality of water all the way to stopping providing water. We came to understanding, based on the history, that the adversaries, in some cases, will not stop once they penetrate the network. They want to take it the whole way, and in some cases, they even jeopardized and manipulated the system in such a way that was influencing the normal operation of the system. It's not just about information of clients or causing you loss of finance, but it's also stopping your daily and everyday operation of the system. This threat can cause significant impact on the availability, quality, and in some cases, the cost of the water and sanitation services. We learned that some facilities are not even providing the basic measures in order to mitigate the cyber risk, but it's more fundamental than that. In some cases, we learned that facilities do not even recognize the risk. Not recognizing the risk means that you are not taking any actions to mitigate that. Not recognizing the risk means that management and employees are not aware of the cyber risk. Now, cyber risk is not just in the media. Cyber risk is not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. When you will suffer from a cyber incident. In some cases, we learned that operational malfunction would tend to be related or to tend to be acknowledged as a malfunction of the operation of the system. But in some cases, we increase their awareness and ask them, wait, maybe it's a cyber event, maybe it's not a malfunction of the system. So this is part of the awareness. As soon as you're aware of the cyber risk, your ability to understand what happened to your environment, your ability to take care, to put control, to recover from an event is much, much better. I provide you here with some examples of what to do in order to do the basic, really the basic countermeasures in order to mitigate the cyber risk. And it begins with strong authentication to protect access to critical systems and data. Again, during the study, we learned that even this basic action of people authenticating to the system does not exist. The second thing that I would like to emphasize is the network segregation. I know people tend to think that their environment is air-gapped, but with the technological advancement, the air gap will be blurred. You will need to connect the systems. You will need to get information from the operational technology network in order to be more efficient and in order to provide more value to your customers. So network segregation must be in place in a secure manner. Don't trust the air gap myth because it doesn't exist anymore. And it will, in the future, as I mentioned earlier, it will be blurred and blur more and even more. The third thing is to monitor the network in order to identify signs of malicious activity. I saw in one of the questions that people ask, why don't we have a regional SOC and why don't we have a facility that monitors the environment? I must say on top to that, that if an organization will wait for others to do things, it will not happen. If you acknowledge the risk, if you recognize the risk, and if you know your responsibility, you need to take action by yourself. Don't wait for others to act, because soon as an incident will happen, you will have no one to blame. The fourth thing that I would like to mention here is people need to develop and implement incident response plans. And this is nevertheless important because the fact that you are ready for the day after of the event, you have the right backup plans in place. You have professionals that can help you contain an event and recover from an event, it's extremely important. Again, back to the old and corny sentence, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And as soon as you will be able to understand that, and soon as we will be able to act accordingly and to develop a response plan, our ability to contain an event and to recover from an event will be much better. Cyber threat is not just threatening the water sector. It's also threatening other facilities and other sectors such as the energy, the transportation, and so on. It seems like in the Latin America and the Caribbean, it's a real and growing threat. We learned that more and more incidents of data breach, of OT facilities are being jeopardized without taking the right actions in order to mitigate that. Again, an organization must operate in order to mitigate the risk, to understand the risk. By implementing the recommendation from the study, organization can help and ensure the continued availability, quality, and cost effectiveness of water. It's a matter of business continuity. It's not a matter of complying with regulation. It's a matter of maintaining and providing your customers with the services that you have promised to them. So here I'm calling you for action. Organizations that operate in domain must take steps in order to protect from this threat. And you can take the recommendation that we have published during the study. Sharing is caring. We learned that the culture within the region is a crucial part in that. We learned that organizations like to share information one with another, information about threats, about cyber incidents. Keep doing that. If we will all together share and care about each other, not just on a regular basis, but also on cybersecurity, it will increase the public-private partnership. Now, a few words about the public-private partnership. It's a term coined, I think, a decade ago, and the aim of this term is to demonstrate the dependencies between the public sector and the private sector. Soon as this partnership will be strong enough, the ability to gain more value from the government by issuing regulation and from the private sector by complying to regulation. And by that, not just ticking the box, I'm compliant to regulation, but also the fact that by complying, you are ensuring your business continuity. Addressing those two interests from the government and from the private organization definitely will increase the cyber resilience of your organization. And I can say that based on the experience that we had here in Israel. Here in Israel, we started the journey for cybersecurity by sharing information and increasing awareness with the water facilities in Israel. The government took a brave and a right step by going from one facility to another, examining what they have, and suggesting them with what to do in order to increase their cyber resilience. Further, more than that, we sat down with C-level management of those organizations, showing them what can be the outcomes of cyber events. Again, all the way from data breach to stopping the water pump from providing, from doing what it intends to do. And by that, we shared and showed them the risk from the cyber event. And soon as you are showing the risk and demonstrating what you need to do, you're gaining we gain their cooperation and understanding that action needs to be taken. And along the way, together with them, we put in place some activities in order to ensure that we are able to monitor, to detect, and to respond to a cyber event. And this is the last bullet. We need to prepare our organization. We need to develop a plan. We need to come with some security controls in order to be alert when something suspicious is happening and to act accordingly with our cybersecurity tools. Don't wait. Act now. Thank you, Natalie.
Gracias, Yanir, por tu presentación. Creo que a todos les ha motivado ahora a bajar.
Thank you, Yanir, for your presentation. I think everybody's now motivated to download the study available in the bank's website. Thank you for highlighting that we don't need to panic, but act and be prepared. Now, I'd like to pass the floor to Ariel Northwestern, who is specialized in citizen services and in cybersecurity. He will talk about the tools that go along with the study. Thank you very much, Natalia. Thank you very much, Yanir. Thank you very much, our panelists and the audience. Together with a publication that provides you with the concepts and steps toward action, we have also developed a self-evaluation or self-assessment tool for the organizations in the industry. It's available online and it's implemented in the user browser. It means that it does not store the information you fill in. This tool has 3 stages. In the first one, it identifies the kind of organization and complexity of the organization you manage. In the second stage, depending on the complexity determined in the questionnaire, you can answer some diagnose questions. And in the third stage, you have a diagnose. So this is what we see live on our screen. This is the URL that you can use. This tool also attends to other industries we are also similarly supporting. You have a link to the publication here. And if we go to water industry, we can see the first question. What kind of organization do you belong to? And then it will ask you about the complexity of your organization. It's totally bilingual. We go to the same questions in English, and all the functionality is available in Spanish, English, and Portuguese. And there we can answer the questions. So as not to take too long, I prepared a questionnaire that is pre-answered, where we can see the results according to identified answers. And you use the 5 dimensions of the cybersecurity framework of NIST, identify, protect, respond, and recover. The tool scores us. For example, in identification, according to this questionnaire, we have 67 as a score, 67%. And it can give us specific recommendations according to the dimension in the model. In detecting, for example, it talks about the importance of cybersecurity continuous monitoring concerning protecting data security, etc. So it gives us a diagnosis of the current status and recommendations to be followed. Here we can have a tree of responses. It's quite a complete or quite a thorough tool, and I hope it is helpful for you to know your maturity status in cybersecurity. This tool does not replace the need for professionals and manage all processes orderly to really know that you're protected and complying with all the standards and requirements to prevent or minimize the risk of a cyber threat. Well, I hope you get to know this tool and I hope you find it useful. Now I'd like to introduce our panel members. Besides Maria Donoso from UNESCO and Yanir Lapstein, the author of the publication, we also have Veronica Sanchez, who is the manager of planning and development in the Metropolitan Public Utility for Water and Sanitation in Quito. We also have Brian Fonseca, who is director of the Institute for Public Policies, Jack D. Gordon at Florida International University. Veronica, as a manager in water and sanitation public utility, how do you see this issue of cybersecurity? What are your challenges now and in the future? And what can you tell us about all this? Thank you very much, Ariel. Good morning, everybody. First of all, I'd like to congratulate the IDP for the tool and for this invitation. I have a presentation that I can share with you right now.
¿La estamos viendo?
Can we see it? Yes. Yes, thank you. Okay. Just to tell you, from our side, the EPMAP provides services to Quito, 2,800,000 inhabitants. We are 1,637 employees. We have 240 sources, and we supply services to 4,000 clients or customers. What is the threat we are exposed to? It's no novelty. Former panelists have commented what happened in Mexico and other cities. This is EPM, which suffered a cybersecurity attack in Puerto Rico, and we haven't been the exception. In June 2020, there was a cyber attack that generated an impact in the institution because there was fund embezzlement. We have this process with the prosecutor's office now, and this has meant new controls in our systems and work on training and awareness raising. We know that the biggest vulnerability are people. What is a critical infrastructure? This is the national strategy for cybersecurity in Ecuador. Strategic infrastructure provide essential services. Their functioning is essential, and it allows for no alternative solution. So their disturbance or destruction would have serious impact, and this is what we are exposed to. What are the critical processes in such threats? Service to clients, infrastructure technical management, water management, commercial sanitation management, and commercial management. What about our infrastructure? We have a corporate core or switch with internal and external networks. We have a virtual cloud with financial and commercial data. We have the internet, remote localities, distribution networks, and industrial networks. How is this made up? The operational system is made up for SCADA systems for collecting and conducting water, producing, distributing water and sanitation. We want to migrate to a SIM system that integrates all the SCADAs we have in an organized way that is to be managed in an integrated way with cybersecurity. This costs $30 million. At country level, there's incipient cybersecurity. Since 2011, Argentina dealt with these issues. In 2021, we have the first cybersecurity policy in Ecuador. We were invited to adhere to the Budapest Convention Treaty in March 2022. And in August 2022, the National Strategy of Cybersecurity of Ecuador was published. We know that this is current since 2011 in Colombia. For us, it's big. It's a big challenge. What are actions as a company? We started by the IT network to then go to the OT network. We started this in 2016 with information security through an independent technology area. We also have an implementation of the information security. We created an information security department because it became increasingly important. We did OT network vulnerability analyses, and also we have a program funded by the IDP on this regard. In managerial terms, what lessons have we learned concerning cybersecurity? First of all, empowering top managers to consider these projects and prioritizing allocation of resources, having external organizational support and strategic alliances with third parties to implement best practices. In designing and planning new projects, we need to include specific security requirements. When you don't do that, it's more costly, more complex, and projects are not executed well. Having an impartial third party, we have an cybersecurity officer in charge of this. We are aligned to the National Strategy on Cybersecurity, and also we adhere to international standards such as NIST. We train our personnel and involve them in managing critical infrastructures with security levels. We leverage OT infrastructure and generate incident plans. I'm here for your questions. Thank you very much, Veronica Sanchez. A very good illustration of what you do.
Now, let's transition to English. Professor Fonseca, we got a question from the audience about whether we could share some information about actual attacks that have happened in the sector, and we can expand that question also to describe a little bit of the threat landscape. Thank you.
Sure, thank you so much. So I'll touch on that and a few other things that I've put together that I thought would be helpful for this group. But first, let me start off by wishing you all a good morning or good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Distinguished members of the Inter-American Development Bank and colleagues from around the world. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to speak briefly to you today about the crucial intersection of cyber and water infrastructure, touch on some examples, talk a little bit about the threat actors, and then maybe just some brief comments about where we should be going. And I'll do that over the next few minutes so I can save certainly time for Q&A. Of course, I know that you all understand more than most that water infrastructure plays such a fundamental role in ensuring public health, economic development, and environmental sustainability. And a cyber attack on water infrastructure can have severe consequences on society, of course, and economy. And I know that some of the previous speakers talked about sort of the changing landscape, but I'd like to at least point out three considerations that I think are crucial in understanding the rise of cyber attacks on critical infrastructure. The first being the proliferation of knowledge or know-how among attackers. The second is the increasing degree of connectivity of water infrastructure. And then finally, the persistence of legacy systems within, much of the sort of global water infrastructure landscape. And so first, what do I mean by proliferation of know-how? What I mean by that is, if you looked sort of a decade or two ago, you would have found you would have found sort of the capacity to deliver cyber attacks to be relatively niche. You needed some, sophisticated technical skills to be able to conduct, an attack that had consequence. And over the last decade or so, you've seen a far greater proliferation of that knowledge of how to function in cyberspace in ways that are detrimental to critical infrastructure. Today, you can go on the dark web and you can commission someone to provide you with some type of ransomware package that you can deliver by watching a YouTube video. And I don't mean to oversimplify it, but just to suggest that there is a proliferation of know-how that I think is coinciding with an increased connectivity globally. And of course, what I mean by that, and others have certainly articulated it, is that water infrastructure is increasingly interconnected, and it's creating new entry points for cyber threats. Today, water infrastructure heavily relies on computerized systems for efficient management, treatment, distribution, and the integrity and reliability of these systems are paramount to guaranteeing the delivery of safe and clean water to communities. The integration of supervisory control systems, data acquisitions, SCADA systems, Internet of Things devices, cloud-based technologies, certainly demand a robust cybersecurity practice across all interconnected components that include critical water infrastructure. So you have the proliferation of know-how, you have increasing connectivity among water infrastructure, and then finally, you have this persistence of legacy systems. Many water utilities still rely on outdated infrastructure, which lack proper cyber measures. For example, water utilities in the United States, encompassing both potable and wastewater treatment facilities, significant challenges due to their fragmented nature, limited budgets, and outdated technologies. Upgrading these systems and integrating robust security protocols is a significant challenge that requires investment and careful planning. So the persistence of legacy infrastructure is attracting cyber threats. So on one end, you have the proliferation of know-how, you have increasing connectivity, and the state of technological infrastructure in the water space is attracting cyber threats. And so what are those cyber threats? What are those threat actors? Well, there's in my opinion sort of three dominant threats in this space, all with different motivations and different degrees of sophistication. So first and foremost, you have state-sponsored cyber threat groups. And so these often, attack for geopolitical or economic motivations, and they tend to have a high degree of sophistication. So they tend to be threats that you take more serious because of the ability to deliver really sophisticated technical cyber attacks. The second, of course, that we've talked about is cyber criminals. Their motivation is not geopolitical in many cases, it's really profit-driven. They also have a moderate to high degree of sophistication. And so that's why I think you see state-sponsored and cyber criminals being the predominant threat actors in this particular space. And of course, you have hacktivist organizations, insider threats, thrill seekers, all with lower degrees of sophistication and varying degrees of motivation. But that cyber threat landscape is increasingly, comprised of a wide range of groups that hack for a wide range of motivations and varying degrees of sophistication. So let me talk a little bit about the threat, and then I'll provide some examples, Ariel, as you asked. When we think about sort of the threat to water infrastructure, we're talking about the ability of malicious actors to exploit vulnerabilities in network systems, leading to disruptions, water contamination, even physical damage to infrastructure. And protecting these systems is vital to safeguard public health and maintain essential services. I'll talk specifically about three types of attack areas that we're seeing, or three types of vulnerabilities. First is the growth of the ransomware space, and I'll codify that in just a moment, but certainly ransomware is growing rapidly. Second is sort of persistent attacks using or penetrating through SCADA systems. And then finally, we've seen consistently attacks originating from insider vulnerabilities. And those insider vulnerabilities could be intentional or unintentional. And I'll talk about that in just a moment. But just to kind of put in context, globally, we've witnessed a concerning 7% increase in weekly cyber attacks in the first quarter of this year compared to the first quarter of last year. And even across various nations, we've seen a growth in attacks specifically against potable and sanitation water services. In 2022, a significant ransomware attack caused extensive damage to water provider in England, placing the water supply of about 1.7 million individuals at risk. And similar ransomware episodes have been faced by suppliers throughout the United States. Just between 2019 and 2021, U.S. law enforcement has essentially noted that that attackers targeted at least 5 major U.S. water and wastewater treatment facilities. And again, those numbers don't necessarily account for lots of other smaller, less sophisticated attacks or attempts to attack water facilities, but they noted 5 major ones just in that short span of period. And of course, earlier this month, a water provider in southern Italy that serviced close to 500,000 people encountered technical issues resulting from a ransomware attack that was perpetrated by a group called the Medusa Ransomware Group. They claimed responsibility for the attack. The attack initiated on April 28th of this year, and it affected a utility managing the gathering, delivery, and distribution of potable water for roughly 125 municipalities in southern Italy. What they asked for was in order to delete the data that they had taken, they asked for a $100,000 ransom. And then they offered a $10,000 cost just to give them more time to determine if they were going to pay the full ransom or not. And again, that was just to get the data deleted so it wasn't distributed in the public domain. And they made lots of claims about the types of data that they had that might sort of impact not just sort of the functioning of the facility, but all of the leadership discussions that have gone on over the period of time in which the data they seized. And so so that was one of the most recent ones. Let me talk briefly about SCADA systems, because I think we continue to see a persistent exploitation of SCADA systems. There's a few reasons for this. And so when we talk about SCADA systems, we're talking about how many industries, including water infrastructure, use these SCADA systems to monitor and control industrial processes. And I think they remain crucial to sort of the cyber threat landscape because they're often exploited by cyber attackers. Here are some, I just want to talk about briefly some of the reasons why SCADA systems are vulnerable to cyber attacks, and then I'll end with insider threats briefly. But as I pointed out earlier, legacy systems, right? So many SCADA systems in use today were designed and implemented before cyber threats were a major concern. And as a result, they lack a lot of the modern security features, and they can be more easily compromised. Second is sort of the internet connectivity. While SCADA systems, there is an increasing, interconnectivity of SCADA systems, even though, as was pointed out earlier, there have been attempts to air gap these systems so that you don't have access to the internet, but you're still seeing an increase in connectivity that is creating vulnerabilities. Another important one that we haven't talked about was sort of the lack of encryption. Data transmitted by SCADA systems is often not encrypted, and that means if an attacker is able to intercept the data, they can read and potentially manipulate or exploit, the access to that data. And then lastly, and of course there are more, but the other one I wanted to touch on was the supply chain risks associated with SCADA systems. SCADA systems often involve hardware and software from a variety of vendors. And if any of these vendors have poor security practices, it can introduce vulnerabilities into the SCADA system. And so we've seen a growth in attacks on supply chains in which some organizations in the supply chain that don't have the requisite security provisions in place end up creating vulnerabilities, for larger infrastructure utilities. And so I think it's important to at least highlight the risks associated with supply chains. So a few other notable attacks on SCADA systems. One relatively recent here not too far from where I sit in Florida was the Oldsmar water treatment plant that was attacked in 2021. In this incident, an unknown attacker remotely accessed the SCADA system of the water treatment plant. The attacker attempted to increase levels of sodium hydroxide in the water supply to dangerous levels. Fortunately, an operator noticed the change and intervened before harm can be done. But you've seen some of these that have actually been exacerbating. I'll tell you, well, one wild example that I recall from several years ago was actually an attack on a water facility, a wastewater treatment facility that was perpetuated by a corporate competitor. There was a company that wanted to displace an incumbent facility manager, and what they did was they penetrated the system. They turned off the alarms and changed some of the mixtures in an effort to try to make the incumbent or the service provider look bad in an effort to try to outcompete them for a multi-billion-dollar bid that was coming. And so not only see sort of the criminals, state actors, but here's an example of a corporate competitor that tried to use cyber in order to gain an advantage during a potential tender. And then lastly, again, insider threats, intentional and unintentional vulnerabilities from within the organization. And that includes employees with access to SCADA system that can pose a threat in sort of the misuse of their access. And so, I won't go into depth on insider threats, and we can talk about that. But if you think sort of the broad picture, I think the three big vulnerabilities, the ransomware threat, the exploitation of SCADA systems, and of course, insider threats, really are really important in understanding, these vulnerabilities that we have to sort of address, in the near term. And so, as I conclude, in building off the comments of earlier speakers, I think there's three things that we should be thinking about. We should be thinking about, as was pointed out just a few minutes ago, a collaborative approach. Public and private sector collaboration, along with international collaboration, is key to addressing cyber threats in water infrastructure. Sharing best practices, threat intelligence, and developing joint strategies, I think, can enhance resilience against cyber threats. Risk assessment and mitigation is incredibly important. And so organizations need to conduct comprehensive risk assessment that enables proactive identification and vulnerabilities and the development of tailored cyber strategies. Implementing things like encryption, access control, network segmentation, and continuous monitoring are critical to mitigating risk. And then finally, cybersecurity culture. Nurturing a cyber culture within water utilities, I think, is vital. Encouraging a proactive approach, promoting information sharing, and fostering a mindset of continuous improvement, I think, can significantly strengthen defenses against cyber threats. And in fact, that's one of the things that the state of Florida has asked our university to do, which is train public administration leadership across the entire state of Florida on the threat vulnerabilities of cyber. And that means getting in front of administrators and executives that are non-technical and making sure they understand the threat and understand sort of strategy development and incident response in ways that they can empower their respective technical, their technical teams. And so just to conclude, the evolving threat landscape and recent incidents demonstrate an urgent need to address cyber risks in water infrastructure. And I think we must invest not just in modernizing systems and implementing robust security practices, but also fostering cultures of cyber awareness within our countries and in our respective, critical infrastructure sectors. And it's collaborative efforts among stakeholders, both nationally and internationally, that are crucial to safeguarding our water infrastructure from these threats and ensuring provisions of safe, delivery to our citizens. And so I know I went over briefly, but I hope that sort of sets us up for a good Q&A.
Thank you very much, Professor Fonseca. Yes, you've definitely touched on many crucial aspects of the discussion. And we have multiple questions coming in on the Q&A chat. Así que con las múltiples preguntas que nos están llegando.
So with the multiple questions arriving in the chat, thanks to the audience, we can now touch upon a few ones. First one is a question that doesn't have the cyber security center? How can they monitor attacks in the water sector? And the question specifically is if we can have a regional organization to help with this. Who would like to take this question?
Verónica o María.
Perhaps Verónica or María?
¿Han habido intentos de crear SOCs regionales o
There have been attempts at creating binational SOPs. There have been sub-regional ones also in transporter watershed. There are no regional ones. SOC, I think she says, creating an SOC would need us to take into account the technological differences between countries. There are also regulatory and legislation aspects that are different between countries, and there's the issue of trust, particularly. A true negotiation and debate on how this can introduce security elements or just the contrary at the national level of each country creating this SOC. It's an alternative being debated, but I have no information about this. Perhaps other colleagues have information about a true attempt of producing a regional or at least binational SOC. Just a couple of minutes here. Well, we don't have a structure that would allow to have a SOC in our country. We can have this in the company by monitoring our SCADA network, but it's much more complex than that, and we are not at that point yet.
Muchas gracias, María.
Thank you very much, Maria and Veronica. Brian?
No, I was just going to add that I think countries are still struggling with information sharing across governing institutions, right? We're talking about threats to one critical infrastructure, but you're seeing threats to other critical infrastructures also rising, like public health. You know, financial sector continues to be, you know, one of the most sought after in terms of targeted attacks. Security institutions, look at the recent, you know, wave of attacks against Latin American security institutions perpetuated by Guacamaya. And so I think that, again, governments are struggling just to share information across governing bodies. And I think, you know, again, we haven't gotten to the point where you're seeing real global and regional threat sharing. Although there have been efforts in the US in 2015, they passed legislation through that's now governed through CISA, our cybersecurity and infrastructure security agency, to, you know, put a series of you know, entities in place to facilitate information sharing of threats across government. We're still trying to figure that out, I think, in meaningful ways before we can get to the regional. But organizations like the OAS, Carrie Ann Barrett and the team over at the OAS have been working really hard to at least, you know, build venues and convenings where we can come together and share those kinds, you know, that kind of information.
Thank you very much. A question I'll direct to Yanir. There was a question in the chat about the concept of network separation. Can you briefly explain the concept and why it's important?
Yeah. Network separation basically means dividing between the IT network and the OT network. The IT network is the more administrative network. The OT network is the one more related to the SCADA, OT, and ICS environment. Separation between those networks means that only applications and needed information will be transmitted between the two networks. Even more than that, in the most secure way possible. In some cases, there are just firewalls separating between the networks. In other cases, you will find unidirectional diode that will share the information between the networks. The basic idea is to keep those networks separated as possible, but on top of that, I must add that we are seeing more and more harmonization of networks due to the need to be more efficient. For example, to share information from the OT to CRM system or ERP system in order to provide them with information about equipment that is missing and so on and so forth. But the basic idea, bottom line, is to separate between the network as much as possible. And if it's not possible, to make it in a secure way. I'm saying all that when I see the huge advantage of technology, advancement of technology, Industry 4.0, as mentioned here earlier, and the future of IoT.
Thank you, Yanir. Y voy a tomar una pregunta rápida acerca de la herramienta de autoevaluación. La
I'm going
pregunta
to take a
aproximadamente
quick
cuántas
question about the
preguntas
self.
incluye la herramienta. Y ahí les puedo comentar.
And the question is, how many questions does this tool have? You have three levels of questionnaire: basic, intermediary, and advanced. And this determines the scope of questions in the questionnaire. Generally speaking, the questionnaire is answered in 1 or 2 hours, and the determining factor is to have the information at hand. Sometimes you get to a question where you don't have available information and you have to find out. You can keep the questionnaire as it was answered and go look for the information and go back. It's just in your browser. So it takes between 1 hour or 2 hours for an organization to fill in this questionnaire, but it depends on the availability of information. Now, to finish this panel, I'd like to ask our 4 panelists if they have some main ideas what main ideas they're taking with them from this event. Veronica, Brian, Maria, and Yanir. Can you repeat, please? What are the main ideas you're taking away from this event with you? Well, Latin America has to get ready for this challenge ahead at different levels in each country and supported by our governments. As I said a moment ago, SOX is something we don't have. We just have a 2022 regulation published. So it's very new for us. And we have to foresee all these things in each company, as I commented, implementing cybersecurity, implementing mechanisms from the top management, and be ready before these challenges. And also, we need to have solutions in our IT infrastructure. Brian?
So I think Veronica made some great points. I think 2 things that I might also take away from this is, we talk a lot about vulnerabilities, but one of the big pieces that we're missing on solutions is really the shifting of culture. I kind of alluded to it, but I think there needs to be, the data tells us that individuals remain the biggest vulnerability to organizations, including critical infrastructure like water. Increasing the understanding and knowledge from the top of these organizations to the, to the general staff of these organizations, I think is critical, because I think they are the first line of defense. That's 1. 2, we didn't talk about it. I did see a question referencing it in the chat, but we are pursuing, solutions in the artificial intelligence and automation space that's going to help with sort of rapid detection and patching of vulnerabilities, the IDing of of threats in your infrastructure. And so at some point, the technology is going to start to close the gap that we have now on workforce, which if you're looking at the United States, we have over 700,000 vacant cybersecurity positions in the United States. That number is probably scalable all over the world, in which you're talking about, millions of vacant cyber positions. So there's a lack of, of talent that's filling these positions. So I think we got to start with, working on closing the gap, changing culture in organizations, and leaning on technological solutions to help fill some of the gaps.
Thank you, Brian. María Donoso, por favor.
Sí, yo me uno a todo lo que han dicho los colegas
I
anteriores.
join everything our colleagues said first, but I should say also that we have the need to have more training. Brian just mentioned these figures in the United States about the need for this specialized workforce. If we did the same thing in our region, the amount would increase like 10 or 100 times. So we need to generate capacity, and we have to support universities in doing so. And we also need to support local governments or smaller companies that have no access to consultants, that are too expensive or simply non-existent in some countries. And also trying to support a better understanding of the issue and its consequences. We need to have many more talks about cybersecurity in the water and sanitation industry.
Yes, please.
Yeah, it was in Spanish, sorry. I wrote down 4, I think, fundamental things. One, at the end of the day, we are all managing risk. And some might say, look, I understand the risk, but I decided not to take action because I have a bigger plans or much more important things to do. It's good enough, but don't neglect the risk. Recognize it and take action. The second thing, I think, is to nominate someone that will be responsible and in charge of cybersecurity within your organization. Someone that will be aware, someone that will make awareness within the organization, someone that you can address to in case of an incident or suspicious event. Once you give responsibility to people, people will start acting. The third thing that I wanted to mention is, as I mentioned during the study and the interviews, we came to understanding that many organizations are planning to implement new technologies to improve their existing systems and so on. What I wanted to say specifically regarding to that is, as soon as you will plan cybersecurity as an integrated part with your new facility, with your new system, it will be much more cheaper than patching it later on, and B, it will be much more efficient. So initial planning when you're building a new facility or new environment. And the fourth thing, if you think that you are mature enough, I would highly recommend to deploy end-to-end coverage. And by coverage, I mean monitoring and detecting. We have learned that more than 70% of the cyber attack begins from your IT network, jumping to your OT and jeopardizing your whole process. So the latest trend right now is to have end-to-end coverage, monitoring and detecting of your environment in order to provide decision makers with the most exact information to take the right decision. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yanir, and to all the panelists. Quiero agradecerles a todos los panelistas, a Verónica Sánchez, Brian.
I'd like to thank all the panelists, Veronica Sanchez, Maria Donoso, Yanir Lobstein, and Brian Fonseca. Yanir is the author of the publication. We have an editorial team, Marcelo Bassani, Jan Fernando Melgan, and they helped us. Maria Donoso reviewed, James Pichado and Ivan Rodriguez did so too. And Pablo Ansuri and their team developed the self-assessment tool. I now pass the floor to Natalia to finish this event. Thank you very much for this excellent panel and these presentations. It's a passionate issue that we need to tackle with as digital technologies expand. We gain in efficiency, but also in risk, and we have to be ready against that risk. In the presentations, we saw, and also in the welcoming words, we saw that the countries in our region are maturing in this regard with strategies. The bank is accompanying this process, but there is still a lot to do to attend to critical infrastructures, such as water and sanitation. Maria Julia said that without cyber resilience in the sector, this would be a catastrophe for health
Hemos visto
and
cuáles
productive sectors and
elementos
trust in the system. We have seen what are elements subject to cyber attacks. Maria Donoso talked about this, how attacks could have different ways of acting, as Yanir highlighted, and how we have lots of challenges and clear disadvantages in those who counteract generated attacks. So download the study, check the recommendations for governmental and private actors, take advantage of the tool Ariel presented. It will allow you to evaluate your cybersecurity level. Also, the lack of professionals and specialized services. There is a great opportunity for innovators and entrepreneurs in the region. The end message is that we should not panic. It's a risk. We have to manage it. We have to act. And as Yanir said, it's better to do so from the start and not patch over afterwards. And of course, this depends on all, as Brian highlighted. The human factor is the first point of defense and the first point of weakness. So with no more to say, thank you to the panelists, the donors of innovation sources that allowed us to tackle with these knowledge products, and to the audience with us today. Greetings to you all. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you all. Thanks.